All right. Welcome into another episode of Hockey Royalty Live, the official podcast of HockeyRoyalty.com. We're talking about the Kings are surging, number one team in the Western Conference since January 1st. We got King Koopa's elevation. We got our what's going on around the Pacific, and our draft grades, are they getting elevated? Stay tuned, like and subscribe. Let's find out. Let's go. Man, I was stumbling over my words with excitement because this episode's going to be fire, boys. How are you guys doing this afternoon or this evening?
Doing good.
Wonderful.
Doing good. Yeah, it's been we're in the middle of an atmospheric river out here in Southern California. So it's been a wet and wild winter for Southern Californians that I can't remember ever experiencing before. But besides that, I'm doing great. How are you doing, Joe?
Good. Something that's really exhausting for those that haven't experienced it yet is 2-year-old soccer. Took my 2-year-old today to soccer, and boy, that's a grind. I'm gonna tell you right now. But it was fun, and it was a grind, but it was entertaining all at the same time. So
a little whiskey in the coffee cup does wonders for midget soccer. Yeah. And cue Russell Morgan. All right. No, it's been good, guys. And an atmospheric river, that sounds like something out of Star Wars or Lord of the Rings. I don't know what's going on there in Southern California, but I will be there. So it's official. I've already booked the flights, booking some tickets. Going to be there that double weekend. I believe it's the 25th, where the Blues and Winnipeg are coming in. So, love to see you guys. Love to see the longtime fans here. Have a beer, say what's up. So just shoot me out, hit me DMs on the old Twitskis, and we'll try to get together, man. So let's get into it. Before we do that, we got CJ in the chat early here. Hello, everyone. Looking forward tonight. Shake Masters say, hey, let's get this show on the road. We want to talk some Kings hockey. CJ already saying, hey, 50 points in 29 games. Is that good? ? I think it is. Trapper saying, yeah, it is. The show's already going to get some guys here. Lieb coming in. Hey, guys. What's up, Lieb? Thank you for coming in the chat. Let's go. Let's get it started here. Kings are hot. Super spicy. Best team in the Western Conference since January 1. Best team in the Western Conference since the trade deadline. Just firing on all cylinders. Still winning games without their leading scorer out, which we thought would be a huge issue. Russell, we'll talk about that a little bit later. He's seen him walking around the stadium, so no need to hold your breath anymore. He looks like he's going to be okay. But what are you seeing from this team? The identity has seemed to change a little bit, or maybe just has been amplified since the trade deadline. Start with Russ. What are you seeing from this team in this little streak of games since last week?
It's strange because you kind of watch the games and they're not necessarily like dominating, but they just keep winning. So you're getting a lot of depth scoring. I mean, players, this is what we've kind of talked about throughout the years, balance. And since Fiala is out, we've seen a lot of that balance take place, whether it's the first line that dominates one night, whether it's the second line that wants to come on, like we saw in the last game with Trevor Moore finally getting back on the board, or even the third line with Gabe Vilardi and Lizotte and Iafallo pinching in. So it's really been this, like, the whole team kind of pinching in and helping to get W's lately. And I guess you can't win games without some good goaltending. And that's another big thing that's been happening is they finally got some good goaltending in the last few stretch of games here with Korpisalo and Copley, everyone just kind of wants to keep riding off that he's eventually going to fall, and he keeps on winning. And Korpisalo has come in and been everything we kind of expected him to be. He's just been a sound, good goaltender who's made the right saves. I think the last game against the Islanders, he had just that one little blip. I think it was, you can call it more of a softy type goal, but he bounced back and made some huge saves to get the victory and secure the win for the Kings later on. So yeah, I mean, it's been a lot of confidence shown in this team lately, and they're starting to figure out or find out that they can. I mean, when they can win every night, any team that comes into their barn. I mean, we saw it in Colorado too when we had the live stream, which was really fun, by the way. That they can just kind of go into games knowing that there's a chance that they can win. So, I mean, it's great to see if you're a Kings fan.
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned one of the things is depth. Depth throughout the lineup. They're getting scoring from all over the place. But the biggest thing you mentioned, the goaltending. I mean, this is a team that we've harped on it for all season long about how bad it is. And just to put it into perspective, for the season, they are the third worst team in 5-on-5 save percentage over these last 6 games. So pretty much since the Korpisalo trade. I know Korpisalo didn't play in that first game that he was around, but in the last 6 games, they have the second best 5-on-5 save percentage in the NHL. So whether it's Korpisalo or whether it's Copley, they're doing the job. I mean, and that's just shows like the Kings to be where they are with how bad of goaltending they've had all season is impressive in and of itself. And I think probably the biggest reason that you're seeing them be the best team or one of the best teams in the NHL, over the last little while here is because they're getting saves. And you just can't understate it enough. So full credit to the goaltending. They're getting some depth scoring. They're filling in when you're losing. Some guys go out. Fiala's out. Obviously, they've gotten the return of a couple of guys. Trevor Moore's back. Kaliev returned to the lineup the other night after a few games of being scratched. So guys are just kind of getting plugged in and filling in roles. And that's huge to see when there's this type of depth and this type of goaltending.
You want team, and the Kings had this last year, and maybe it just goes to leadership, maybe it goes to coaching, or probably both. But when injuries happen, the team stepped up and continued winning games. Obviously, not to the extent of last year with the injuries, but when your best player from a point standpoint this year goes down, if you were watching live with us, made us gasp. Like we were like, oh, like that's we're no longer going deep in the playoffs if he's gone. Right. And the team has continued to find a way to win. The power play took a while to shuffle to get things going. You looked a little bit at Quentin Byfield on the first unit there for a little bit. He's playing fantastic, and we'll get to him later on. But it's just something that this team seems to be galvanized together, or maybe Gavrikoffinized, so to speak, since this trade of where this team is going. And you like it because all the teams that win win cups, like go through some sort of turmoil, come out of it better, and continue to win. Last year was a turmoil type season, like constant injuries. Yeah, they outplayed where they were supposed to be, but everybody's like, man, if we had Doughty or if we had this guy, like we could have played a lot better than what we played at. And now you're seeing that team come to fruition. We've been relatively healthy, knock on wood, and we're getting top-notch goaltending, at least 5-on-5 for the last 6 games. Like, the sky's the limit, and the record shows it. The fact that we're number 1 in the Western Conference after considering since January 1st, let alone the trade deadline.
Yeah, and I don't think, I mean, you look at the last, that schedule helps. I mean, they haven't really played a tough schedule lately, and they're not going to play a tough schedule moving forward. And that's, hey, it is what it is. You got to play the teams that are in front of you. And we talked about how the Kings at times struggled with some of these weaker teams. So they're doing a job. I mean, that's not to take away from what they're doing. And Russ, like I think you'd mentioned how it doesn't seem like they're dominating. It's like the way I look at it is they're just this. They just keep coming in waves, and it's just like there's no break. They're hard to play against when they're at their best, and it's just there's not that dominant like Boston Bruins or Colorado last year type of dominance, but they just kind of they just take the game over, and before you know it, look at the Islander game and it's 4-1 and it's over, right? I mean, the Kings by no means were kind of quote unquote dominating that game. I don't think it was a bad first period or a bad start to the second, but it's just like they just keep coming in waves. They're not a top heavy team. They're not a one line team. They just keep coming at you. So, and that's tough to handle, especially for teams that they're playing that are weak. And the Islanders, I know they're in a playoff position, but again, I don't think they're that good of a team. I think Sorokin, keeps them above water. So those teams can't handle that. The teams like St. Louis and Washington, and they just can't handle this type of depth that the Kings are able to throw at them, which is impressive.
Well, even a team like Colorado, we heard from Nathan McKinnon after that game, you can just see how frustrated he is playing against the Kings. And it's because of the style that they play. That 1-3-1 style is, it's like you said, Joe, it's like a slow burn. It just like creeps in your mind, like, what do I have to do as a player playing against the Kings? What do I have to do to finally get past this wall of defenders that's at the blue line? And I mean, especially with Gavrikov, because I mean, with one thing, we'll talk about him more later, but one thing I've noticed with him is his ability to hold the blue line. It's been insanely good. And that's kind of the Kings' MO is you want to force dump-ins with the 1-3-1 style that they play. And that frustrates skilled players like McKinnon, McDavid, Draisaitl, like all these skilled players that love to carry the puck into the zone and use that skill. But since you have like 3 players converge on you at the neutral zone, when you get to the Kings blue line, you have to force the puck in. And that ability to kind of frustrate players, you start to see them get off their game a little bit, and the Kings just pounce. And they pounce on the situation and the offensive counterattacks that they're able to build on. And that's kind of what we saw a lot last year with the nice line, because I mean, with the nice line with Danault, Arvidsson, and Moore, they were so good in transition. They were huge in transition. And with the 1-3-1, if you're able to build a good counterattack off a team that forces puck dumps, I mean, that's huge. You're going to get a ton of goals off that. And we're starting to see that come with the Kings winning games a lot more. Is McClellan has instilled that system into their identity. I mean, identity was a huge keyword for the early part of the season. We just didn't know what this team was. I mean, they were giving up goals left and right. They didn't seem to kind of be able to limit a lot of those or force a lot of those dump-ins. There was bad goaltending. But now we're seeing a lot of the good things that made them become a 99-point team last year, even with all the injuries that they were going through. And as long as they can the thing that I worry about is when you're playing this well and things are going so right, like every night, it's like you have to be consistent. You can't just let your foot off the gas. We have to see this every night, and especially when you're facing maybe a subpar opponent. But yeah, you're only able to go up against the team that's up in front of you. And for the Kings, even with the rough schedule, they just have to keep that in their mindset that, hey, even though we're going up against a team like Anaheim or Vancouver or whoever comes into crypto.com, Columbus next game, yeah, you have to keep up that momentum and keep that system intact and can't get away from that, because then that's what instills bad habits, especially when you're this close to the playoffs. So that's the one thing that I guess we'll be watching when we get closer to game 1 of the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Lee Mentor comes in here. The Kings are like the headache you get with Pee Wee soccer. It doesn't seem annoying right away, but after 20 minutes, you're just over it.
That's perfect. Yeah, exactly.
I just think you're looking at the system's always been there, and we kind of diagnosed it. I don't know, not really. I wouldn't say diagnosed, but it kind of just hit me as an epiphany, or just right in the forehead during the last live stream. And we were focused on the 1-3-1 and how they run it and why is it so effective, because it was made light by the broadcast, right? You said Nathan McKinnon was like, hey, they're tough to play against, right? And so every D-core, one of those guys has to move up into that part of that 3 and is responsible for a board, right? So you're looking at Gavrikov is playing the left side on that board. You're looking at Mikey Anderson plays the left side on that board. And so you're looking with a guy that needs to be the wall and then a guy that chases the puck on the dump-ins. So you have to have a guy that can skate backwards, do all that kind of thing, retrieve the puck, good first pass type outlet. You have that with Doughty. You have that with Walker, and you have that with Sean Durzi most of the time. So like pairing these guys together to where one fits on the wall and one's a good puck retriever, we're starting to see some of these lines kind of find that way. The outliers or the stats for the Gavrikov-Roy line are really effective, and we didn't really think, Joe said it, we didn't really think that they had a good puck retriever, but they've been so staunch on the defense that it's been kind of a moot point at that point. But it's been kind of interesting to, after I kind of like made that connection after 4 years now, not making that connection, making the connection now, you're kind of noticing what the responsibilities and why the responsibilities are their responsibilities. And it's kind of made it interesting on why they are so tough to play against. And now that the goaltending is more consistent, we're not going to see a lot of those games where we're getting blown out 6-0 because of the fact that there's more structure on a consistent basis, and we're not letting in bad goals as we've seen earlier in the season.
Yeah, and I think, remember early in the season, I remember, Russ, we talked after the Calgary game when it was just kind of a chaotic game. Yeah, and I wrote the piece about, like, it didn't seem like it was a structural issue. It was a lot of individual, just early season mishaps, early season, like brain's not in it yet. You're not. And I think if you look, and I think this is true, maybe don't quote me, but I think this is true, which is why as a bettor, there's a lot of overs in the early part of the NHL season, because it's chaos right now. Teams aren't up to date with their system. Teams aren't in tip-top shape. They're not in game form. So I think there was a lot, and we saw just a lot of mental mistakes with the Kings from some of their top players. Couple that with you having some new players joining the lineup that we talked about, guys that missed significant time last year that were back. And I think that played a lot into it, where I don't think it was a structure thing. I think it was a matter of the players figuring out they need to, and it taking them time to get back into the swing of things. And once they did, yeah, then they're clicking on all cylinders, and it's really difficult for teams to play. Yeah, so I think that was as much as, and obviously, yeah, you're getting saves now, so that's less. That's the number one thing. Let's just not beat around the bush. It is.
Yeah, the saves have to. I mean, that has to grow your confidence as a player, because I mean, if you are playing so well that in terms of defensively limiting chances, which the Kings are one of the best teams in the NHL at limiting chances and limiting shot attempts on net. I think they actually lead the NHL in percentage of shot attempts that miss the net. When you see a puck that goes in kind of soft, that we saw a lot at the early point of the season, that has to bring you down as a player on the ice. Like, you're doing everything in your willpower to play solid defense, play the right system, and then your goalie just kind of lets in a softie. So that has to bring you down a little bit mentally. And yeah, and then like you said, Joe, like there was a lot of kind of new things that the Kings were learning at the early part of the season, with learning to play with Kevin Fiala, who's such a dynamic playmaker that's kind of like a wild card on the ice. Sean Dursey was learning to play the left side. New pairings on the defensive core, new forward
Gabe Velarde was a regular, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we're like, I'm going to look back, and I mean, we remember last year too. The Kings really turned it on after January 1st, and we're seeing that same thing happen again this year. They've turned it on again after January 1st. I would love to check out the records and kind of compare the two, because I know it's probably got to be, since they've been playing a more consistent system, they're adhering to that system a lot more. And you're getting later in the season, players learn how to play with their teammates and learn the chemistry. So now the Kings have become this real solid like machine that just grinds out games and grinds out wins night in and night out. And I mean, yeah, we're talking about a team now that's on the verge of contending for a Western Conference title, which is insane. It's great.
I look at, I think it's interesting here, and I maybe let's go down a little tangent here, which I think is kind of something that you brought up, like learning to play with Fiala. Not that we've had a player like Fiala on our team, but we've had one-sided players in Ilya Kovalchuk, Vladimir Kachev, that didn't really work out long-term with the Kings. They weren't able to function within the structure, or the structure wasn't functioning around what they do best. Obviously, I broke Russell's heart last night, letting him know that Vladimir Kachev's almost a point per game player in Russia this season.
Oh,
and
don't mind me.
59 points in 64 games. We saw Kovalchuk, I think was when he got benched and can put down on the fourth line, he was second on the team in points. So like, it didn't really work out when you have those highly creative guys that don't really play much defense. What do you think is the difference with Fiala at this point? And why is he working where the other two guys maybe didn't work?
Because he's that much better. Like Fiala is, we knew this coming in after the trade was made. He was one of the best 5-on-5 play drivers in the NHL last season, and it's just a glaring. He's in his prime, whereas you look at a Kovalchuk who is obviously well past it, and I wouldn't consider him the same as Fiala in terms of a play driver at that stage of his career, certainly. But Fiala is a wild card. He can make something out of nothing. He can turn defense into offense really quickly. I mean, I think everybody sees it. I mean, I'm not saying anything that's nobody knows. I think he is just significantly better than those players at this stage of his career and their careers.
I think maybe, like you said, play driver, you're looking at Kovalchuk was kind of just a opportunistic shot type guy later in his career. Kachev wants to slow the game down and make the pace come to him, where the motor maybe on Fiala, to where the fact if he makes a bonehead play, he turns around and back checks. He has that effort, which maybe kind of makes up for the fact that he's a free form amoeba out there and kind of breaks down the system. But he also breaks down other people's systems on more often than not with how he drives play. So,
yeah, I mean, I think you can make an argument that Fiala is probably, easily a top 10 winger in the NHL. And if it weren't for the system that the Kings play, if he played on a team like Colorado or a more aggressive type offensive team, he would be a 100-point player probably. It's just the things that the moves that he makes on the ice is, this is a player that the Kings haven't seen, Kings fans haven't seen in years. We talk about Kovalchuk. I love to talk about Kachev. That was kind of more about wishful thinking. He came in, he wasn't really a defender. The guy never even crossed his own blue line. But yeah, and in Kovalchuk, people could talk about maybe it was misuse or whatnot. But with Fiala, he's just a totally different level. He's easily top 10 winger in the NHL. This is a player that can create his own, scoring chances just by himself and doesn't even need teammates. But with that type of player, it's hard to learn to play with, especially for a team that's so instilled into the system. So you have to adapt to that. And it took a while for teammates to kind of learn to play with Fiala. We're still watching Philip Deneau and Arvidsson kind of learn to play with him a little bit when they were together. Because with Deneau, that's a systemic type player. That's a player that plays really solid defense and is really, really good in the neutral zone. So it's been a little bit of a kind of a learning process to play with Fiala. But it's just it's a player. It's just crazy. It's the contract that he signed over the offseason. We didn't really know much about him. Even myself, I didn't really know much about him. But it's funny because he goes from a team like Minnesota, who's also a really kind of defensive first type style team. Now he's on the Kings. It's like, I wonder what would happen if he was on a team like Toronto or one of these more offensive driving teams. Because, he'd be off the charts in terms of scoring. But it's been a player that the Kings have needed. And we kind of saw how they were a little bit more, I guess, shut down against the Predators game. That's kind of a one-off. The ice was terrible. The Predators kind of went into a shell and got some really good goaltending. But in the Islanders game, they were able to turn up offensively. So if they're able to build on that and kind of learn to score without Fiala, and then once he comes back, this is going to be a huge, huge jolt of energy and offense for this team going close to the playoffs.
I want to say thank you to a new person in the chat. Tony Lopez just said, I just found y'all recently. Love the content. Super underrated. Keep up the great work.
Thank you, Tony.
Appreciate that. Jolly coming in always. Premier guy coming in here. Trapper helping me out. Brent Clark tonight, 2 goals, 2 assists, +2. Love it there. So what I want to say here for this is, and you asked me to look this up, and I don't know how StatMuse specials this out, and I couldn't really get it to where it was after January 1st for the 2022 and 23 season. But for the 23 season, we're the 5th best overall record, number 1 in the Western Conference. But since January 1st of 2022, so the second half of last season and all of this season, we have the 7th most points of any team in the National Hockey League. And so, that's pretty good in my book. The team's been consistently good for the most part since after last January 1st. So let's talk about this team here going forward. Obviously, the goalie rotation has pretty much been back and forth. T-Mac said that Copley is going to be getting the Columbus game on Thursday night or today, if you guys are listening to it on your way to work. So what do you guys think about the rotation so far? Do you think it keeps going back and forth until somebody really gets quote unquote hot? Or do you think T-Mac is just giving both guys opportunities and then we'll have to make a decision later on in the season?
It's working now, so why get away from it? I think also that the goalies, in terms of Korpisalo and Copley, they both understand the situation. So I'm sure that helps their mentality kind of going into a game, that they know the tandem that's going on, this kind of cycle process going back and forth in terms of starts. So that's got to help the goalies mentally when they get into the game. And then, they're both playing well. So why get away from it? Copley has kind of carried this team and pretty much saved the season for the Kings. And now you bring in Korpisalo, who's also been really playing really well. I think he's 3-0, and he's got a really like a sub or right around 2 goals against average. It's just the Kings are finally getting good goaltending, and they have 2 good goaltenders, not just one. So yeah, keep playing them, and then I guess it'll just have to wait. Maybe once we get closer to the end of the regular season, maybe 5 games left, maybe where you see if you kind of stick to one. But for now, there's still 13, 14 games left. I think you could still have this opportunity where you can go back and forth, especially when you have teams like Columbus coming into the barn. So I don't mind it. I think it's good for McLellan. I'm glad that he's kind of come out, especially today when he said that he realizes the kind of sentimental value of starting Korpisalo against his former team, but he still said, no, we're going to stick to this back and forth. And I really like that he was able to say that and stick with Copley.
Yeah, neither goaltender has played like much better than the other one to where they need to settle on one at this point. I mean, I think we talked about that even before the trade deadline. Like, is who you bring in going to be somebody that is definitely that much better than Copley to where they're going to get, 80% of the starts? And I think that's something that we were all skeptical of. And Korpisalo's played great, but so is Copley. So there's no reason to, I think, go away from this. I don't think you have to settle on one going into playoffs. I know that's kind of a common belief, and I don't think you have to. There's nothing that says you got to stop splitting them. I mean, if they're both playing well, I don't see an issue with it. But again, depending on what happens between now and playoffs, we'll see what happens. But I don't know that if you how do you decide that then? I don't think there's any issue with splitting them, even if it gets to that point.
Let me give you a hypothetical, Joe. Mm-hmm. We love hypotheticals here.
Hypothesize for me, my man.
Yeah, let's do it. Game 1, the Kings play the Oilers in the first round. Game 1, okay. The Oilers are in town. Hopefully they get the home ice advantage. That'd be fun. Game 1, the Oilers come into town. Copley gets to start. They lose 3-2. Do you switch to Korpisalo at that point?
So are you saying has it been like a rotation up until then?
It's been a rotation all the way up until game 82.
Yeah, I go Korpisalo.
And then
why not?
And then let's go the other hand. If they win 3-2, you still go Korpisalo?
What's the 3-2 scenario? Is it a 50 save performance, or is it
I guess. So yeah,
I don't care about the wins. I don't care about the wins and loss. I care about the performance. So if you could win 5-4 or 3-2, but if you only saw 20 shots, it's a hell of a lot worse of a performance than a guy that makes 45 saves in a 2-1 loss. So
I'd be totally fine. I mean, if the Kings want to ride their way to a Stanley Cup final, going back and forth with goaltenders, and they're winning
amazing.
Doing it would be great. I mean, it's totally unprecedented. I can't remember a time when a team went back and forth with goalies just in any start of the playoffs.
T-Mac is like, oh, it's game 7. We flipped the coin. It's going to be Korpisalo tonight.
We played Copley last game. So game 7, pressure's on. It's the next guy up. So, I mean, yeah, it's just something to watch. That's why we're talking about it now. There's still, like I said, there's still a handful of games remaining, over 10 games remaining. So once we get close to that 5-game mark, I wonder if McLellan will stick to one guy. And I know, like it's unprecedented for our coaches to go back and forth with goaltenders starting in a playoff series. So that'll be something to watch to see if he finally sticks to one, because I think they brought in Korpisalo because he's got the pedigree. He's got the playoff pedigree. So I think that's what everyone's leaning to. But with Copley, he just really hasn't backed down.
I gotta. So, and I'm glad you mentioned it. Am I wrong? Am I wrong to get a little annoyed with the playoff pedigree? He's played 9 games.
It was against the Lightning. 85 saves, Joe. Come on.
Full marks. I don't mean to take anything away, but I just feel like people are putting a little too much weight into this playoff pedigree when he's got 9 playoff games. Like,
but you got to also look at the alternative too, because like outside noise, like national coverage, people that talk about hockey, whatever, they look at the Kings, you see Phoenix Copley. This is a journeyman AHL goaltender. This is the reason why a lot of people weren't so high on the Kings even before the trade deadline, because they're being carried by a goalie that has no experience in the NHL, let alone playoff experience in the NHL. So I like that. I think there was a few games ago after the game, someone asked McClellan, like, have you ever seen a goalie come in and kind of just carry the team off with really no experience? And he brought up Jordan Binnington, and I thought that was a great comparison because Jordan Binnington, he kind of came out of nowhere and really carried the St. Louis Blues to a Stanley Cup championship. So, I mean, it'd be great because, I mean, imagine like Phoenix Copley takes the Kings to like, even like just say the Western Conference final. I mean, that's your starting goaltender going into next year is only signed for $1.5 million, which would be huge. So, I mean, it'll be something to watch. And that's the reason why I think a lot of people talk a lot about Korpisalo's playoff experience, because on the other flip of the coin, you have Phoenix Copley, who's really had no playoff experience, let alone just barely getting NHL experience with the Kings this season.
Yeah, I just don't care about 9 playoff games. It just doesn't do it for me. And I'm not like, that's great. It was he's a .941 save percentage in those 9 playoff games. So obviously buoyed by 85 freaking saves, which is insane. So like, I'm not taking that away. It's just I'm also not giving him like extra credit for it. It's more than Copley, but I don't know. I don't want to overrate that, I guess.
And I think the thing with me, like when you're around Copley and you kind of noticing watching him play, even he's got this mentality, this such calm demeanor about him that it just feels like nothing ever bothers him. And I think that's why Kings fans are so. They're not really skeptical about riding Copley into the playoffs, like you, Joe. I mean, even myself, like if the Kings wanted to start Copley and even ride Copley into the whole first round of the playoffs, I'd be totally fine with that because he's just got this calm, confident demeanor about him where it just seems like not one like soft goal would bother him. Where we saw kind of with Kyle Peterson, it just seems like once one goal was let in, then all of a sudden it's 9-8 Seattle winning. I mean, this is like we haven't seen that with Copley where he's kind of let in these. Maybe let's say soft goals. I mean, I can't remember a lot off the top of my head, but it's just nothing has bothered him at this point of the season. Where, I mean, if he goes in the playoffs, I'd be totally confident, and I'm sure the team and the players in front of him feel the same way.
You look at, I think that you have two sides of this coin here, and in green, Hickson comes in and says nothing against Copley, but dude is awesome. But I'd rather have a goalie who has experienced playoff hockey than one who has not. But then you also
have the sentiment. That's the overwhelming kind of feeling that a lot of Kings fans have right now.
And then you have the other side of the coin, and I know this is a different sport. It's just one other one that I cover, which is the NFL, and they said like the whole team knew as soon as Jimmy G got hurt that Brock Purdy was a dude. Like they felt confident in him leading the team. Maybe not to the extent that it ended up being, but they weren't afraid of him to be in that position. And it seems to me, Russ, that you think the same thing of the Kings, that they're perfectly fine and confident with Copley in net. And it seems like Corpy is earning that as well, to where the team probably doesn't even care which goalie comes in. As soon as the lineup is announced, that's the goalie. They're going to back him and they're going to play hard in front of him.
Yeah, it seems like they really have similar personalities from, me just being around the team and in the locker room. They're not really that outspoken. They're kind of more quiet. It'd be funny almost to kind of watch like a car ride with them where just like they say one word to each other and just kind of nod back and forth. I mean, I haven't really been around Korpisalo as much. Gavrikov is a much more outspoken guy and is really great in the locker room. And actually McClellan talked about how a more underrated thing about bringing those two players in, and I guess I have to bring in McEwen into this too, is not just their impact on the ice, but their impact in the locker room has been huge. I mean, they've just kind of gelled right in with this team, which is a really underrated aspect and skill to have. I mean, how much do we talk about with when the Kings won the Stanley Cup championships in 12 and 14? You had players like Matt Green and Rob Scuderi, these players that weren't really that huge in terms of presence on the ice, but their presence in the locker room, carried this team to be a really confident championship contender. And that's kind of what we're seeing with this. They're building this kind of culture. That was a word we talked about a couple years ago too, was culture. And they're building it with players like Phil Deneau, Sean Dursey, and a lot of these really good locker room guys who are just kind of can gel well together and grow this almost kind of family together in this locker room. And we saw that we're seeing that with Gavrikov and Korpisalo too, and even with Copley as well.
It's something that they've needed, and because and we're seeing it firsthand. There's only so long that the core four, as we've been saying for the last couple of years, is going to be there. Brown retired, Quick is gone. You only got two more of those guys. Where is the secondary leadership? Where is the second wave or the next wave? And we're starting to see that with Dano. We're starting to see that with Alex Iafallo and those guys, and which, I mean, he might not be there much longer, but Dano's they're going to be there for quite a bit. Kevin Fiala looked like he's stepped in and taken kind of that role there as well. So we'll see how this team. Mike Anderson for sure, eight year vet now, going to be on that team. So that next wave coming in, going to be huge. So I think it's going to be something that can be said there. But we're going to get into the next step here. Let's get into some grades. As lead mentor said, let's get some B grades for this trade now. I'll allow Joe to have a B minus. Let's go into the trade grades upgraded. Now, obviously, all three of us were harsh considering what people have said on Twitter. I said that, hey, this is not a home run for me until I see this in action. Like, how is this going to work out? I'm not sold at Gavrikov as two left D, all this kind of stuff. Prove me wrong type thing. And some things have happened, and I'll get to my assessment here going forward after you guys have a chance to speak. But Joe, you were echoing my sentiment with Gavrikov. What have you seen from the trade so far? How have you felt now? Are you willing to upgrade it from what you said before after several games? Like, kind of how are you feeling with this?
So if I'll go back to the writing of the grade, and I admit, and I think I said it on the show, like C plus, it did felt harsh. Like it really did feel a little harsh to not at least give a B minus. So I guess we'll see where I come at the end of this. But starting with the goalie, my thing with the goalie was you need to be definitively better than Copley because you need to play all the time. That was my issue. Is like, yes, it's an upgrade, but truly, how much of an upgrade is it if you're playing maybe half the games? And so far, they're rotating, and Copley's playing great. So is Korpisalo. But I don't know. Like as we sit today, like if you ask me in a month if Korpisalo steals the job, or if you ask me in playoff times after Korpisalo wins a series, right? But my whole thing was less about the player Korpisalo. It was more about is a guy that's not going to play every day. How much of an upgrade is that really? And so I still have that question. That question hasn't been answered for me because they're splitting time right now. And we can assume Korpisalo will probably be the guy, but we don't know that right now. So I can't say my opinion has really changed there. Like, I'm not surprised that he's playing well, but I'm not surprised that he and Copley are being very similar. Goalies are goalies, and in a short sample, you can look at Jonathan Quick. He was one of the worst goalies in the NHL all season. He's 3-0 with a .930 save percentage. So
he's a Vezina winner for Vegas.
Well, right. So like none of the I'm sorry. So my opinion hasn't budged on the goaltending right now, and that's not to take away from Korpisalo. I want to be clear; he's playing well. It's just the role right now is they're splitting. He's not the starting.
You can send all your hate tweets to @JW Paterino.
I get plenty of them, so it's fine. For Gavrikov, sort of similar. I was definitely harsher on the player with Gavrikov, but similar to the role. Like, I didn't think he's an LD2. I still have questions. Those haven't been answered, that I think he's a top 4 defenseman. And if you go back to the article that I wrote with the grade, my concern was when push comes to shove, when rubber hits the road, and we still don't know the answer to this, by the way, because right now it's Gavrikov and Roy, but we're seeing Edler really struggle here right now. If playoff time, the pair is Anderson Doughty, they go back to Jersey Roy because that was effective throughout the season, and they really shore up that bottom pair with Gavrikov Walker. Again, how much are we really upgrading? Like, yes, Gavrikov is better than Edler. I'm not going to dispute that, but like, is it that much better as a third pair to where we're like, and if he plays second pair, and you've heard Todd McClellan talk about this after one of the games, they're doing, I think it was after the St. Louis game. I don't remember which one now, that pair may be playing well, but you could be taking away from another. So what, and I don't think the Kings have figured out this balance yet, because I think Edler is the one that needs to be upgraded at this point. So I go back to the article of, I think Gavrikov is a definite upgrade over Edler, but that doesn't solve the second lefty situation. And so that's where I'm at still. And I think the question is still open, I guess I'll say. Like, I don't think that's been answered yet. For as well as Gavrikov Roy has played, I'm still wondering, and this isn't because of Gavrikov's play, it's more because of Edler's play. Will they slide Gavrikov down to shore up he and Walker and then put Durzi back in the comfort zone of he and Roy? Because just they've played together all season. So as much as we don't love it, it kind of makes sense because they were effective in what they did. So I kind of fall back to like, yes, the Kings are better. They're deeper. How much is the question? And I still have the same questions that I had at the time. So because of the performance particularly with Gavrikov, has definitely been better than I expected. Do you want me to bump it to it? Will that make people feel better if I bump it to a B minus? Sure.
We don't care we don't care about feelings here, Joe. We want your honest assessment.
I mean, my questions, all I'll say is my questions are still questions. Like, I want to level set here. Gavrikov has over 5,000 minutes played in his career, over 250 games played. Am I seriously going to change my opinion of a player after 6 games and 100 minutes? Like, everybody whines about people with statistics and small samples. This is the definition of a small sample. Each game we're learning more. I still have questions, but how to change it after 6 games when we have over a 250 game sample? Like, I'm not there yet. Like, again, he's played great. We're learning more every game. He's checking every box, but I still have some of the same questions. And I do go back to, the one game they played that was a road game that they didn't have the matchup, and they played a team with high-end players. They were shoved in their own end for most of the game against Colorado. They won the game, so it gets kind of masked, and that's great. He picked up an assist. Great. You don't want to spend that much time in your defensive zone, though. So I am looking for ask me this question after the next handful of road games, because the benefit that Gavrikov has had is of home games that Todd McClellan has the ability to dictate the matchups against bad teams. That's not Gavrikov's fault. He's doing the job, right? He is passing. It's just when the next 5 road games they play in Calgary, in Edmonton, in Seattle, Vancouver, and Vegas. There's some tough competition there. I want to see how when they go into an opponent's barn where they don't have the matchups against better competition, that's where this is all information. I'm just learning more information with each game. And those are going to be big games for me to see how he performs.
So whether Joe, you're still a C plus or you a B minus now after getting some evidence.
I feel like I feel like it would be soft of me to change it to a B minus based on 6 games. So I'm going to stick, because I don't have answers to my questions yet. So I'm going to stay C plus. Ask me in a month.
Appreciate the solid there. Russ, where are you at, my man? Where are you at? I mean,
I'm kind of with Joe a little bit. So my grade was a B minus, and there's 2 things, and I'm going to focus more on Gavrikov because, like what Joe said, it's Korpisalo. The Kings have played really well. They've been playing against I won't say bad teams, but not necessarily the highest competition. And the thing with the Kings is they limit scoring chances better than anybody else in the league. So Korpisalo isn't really asked to do much, but he's been playing really well. So I don't want to take anything against him. And I thought Korpisalo would come in and play well. So I'm going to focus more on Gavrikov. And there's 2 things I want to focus on that have surprised me with him. One, his ability, like I mentioned earlier, to hold a blue line, whether it's the opponent's blue line, keep the puck in the zone, or deny entries, is just off the charts. It's easily one of the he's easily the best player on the Kings that can do it, because he has this knack, and his reach is just ridiculous. It's just, even we saw it just in the last game on I think it was the Trevor Moore goal, where he held the puck in the zone and it was up in the air. He grabbed it down and was able to keep it and get it to Danault. It was a remarkable play. And that's something I didn't really know much about him when he came over from Columbus. And another thing too is
the octopus?
his aggressiveness in the offensive zone is something that I didn't really know much about either. And even Todd McClellan said that as well after the last game. He said that this was something that kind of surprised him after the first couple of games. Is what he noticed is that this aggressive offensive player out of Gavrikov. And it's funny because you look at just base stats. I mean, we're talking about only 6 games, but he's got 4 points in those 6 games.
Mm-hmm.
He had 10 points in 52 games with Columbus. And yeah, Columbus is a terrible team, but it's not like the Kings are I guess they're a little bit more offensive. But the Columbus plays like a really wild game. So I guess it's kind of hard to compare the two. But with Gavrikov, the thing that we talked about a lot more was I kind of knew that Gavrikov and Roy would work because Roy is just so steady. I mean, he could pretty much play with everybody, but it's going to really affect that third pair. And that's what Joe talked about is we're seeing Alex Edler and Sean Walker. I mean, even in home games against bad teams, kind of get beat almost every time they're on the ice. And it's been kind of unfortunate to watch because you see this third pair. I mean, you go into a barn like Edmonton or even Vegas or Seattle, whoever they face in the playoffs, that third pair is going to get shut down each night. And Joe and I talked about this earlier today. I would like to see Durzi and Roy and Gavrikov and Sean Walker kind of start games together, just kind of feel things out. And then if you get into like high pressure situations or late game situations, then you can kind of float back to Gavrikov and Roy together where you have this really solid shutdown pair. Because in early game situations, if you have Edler and Walker or Edler and Durzi out there together, it's going to be tough to watch. So I think that's why my grade was so low at that point, because I knew Gavrikov would come in and fit really well because he's a really solid defensive player and he's shown a lot more offensive capabilities. But it's the kind of how he fits in the defensive lineups that would kind of dictate where my grade would go. And that's why it was so low, because I just thought that you're going to pay a first round pick for Gavrikov to come in, you're more than likely going to play him on the top 4 pairings. And that's what we've seen the last couple games. And it's affected the third pair. And yeah, those pairings they barely play 10 minutes a game. But I mean, those first periods or second periods or whatever, I mean, that you go down 2-0. I mean, that's going to be hard to come back against teams like that they're going to probably be facing in the first round. So that's why I'll bump my grade up. I'll give a B, maybe close to B+. So I'll bump it up a little bit. But yeah, I'm still skeptical. And that's why these first couple games, it's kind of tough because you're getting a lot of these easy matchups. And you kind of hope to see them play against better teams to see how Gavrikov would fit in, how Korpisalo would fit in against teams like Edmonton or going to Calgary, which they have that road trip coming up. So that'll be the road trip we'll be focusing on. But I think it's almost good too that they're getting these softer matchups, because then you can kind of utilize, and I talked about in an article I wrote, is McClellan's using these matchups to kind of experiment a little bit. And it's been hard too with Durzi out. So you're not able to do as much as you want, because he talks about it after one game, even after I don't know which game it was, but after a game that Gavrikov and Roy played so well together, that you're still going to see different pairings. And I will wonder how much longer and how many more different pairings we'll see until we get to the playoffs, and whether he wants to stick with Gavrikov Roy or maybe slide Gavrikov down to help out Walker a little bit. Because Alex Edler is just, as much as we love him and everything he's done for the franchise this last year and a half, he's just not the player that he once was. And if the Kings have to stick with Edler in game 1 of the playoffs against a team like the Oilers or Golden Knights, that's going to be tough. So, but I'll bump my grade up to a B.
I look at it as a compliment to that Gavrikov, if he moves down to the third pair, that is a formidable third pair. Right. I mean, the second pair, we've got a season's worth of a sample that it worked. I mean, again, I don't think any of us loved it in terms of the fit or if it was perfect, but I think it's certainly better than the Edler Walker. So I think if they're able to do that, I think that's what makes the most sense. And I just want to, I know, Randon, before you go, I want to address, there was a comment about the retrievals, or excuse me, the zone entry defense that Gavrikov is. It's great. I would reiterate, every left defenseman in LA is great. Go look at Mikey Anderson. He's one of the best in the league. Sean Durzee's zone entries, excellent. You know why? Because he's playing the left side on a 1-3-1. So I think, it's going to sound like I'm hating on Gavrikov. I don't mean to take away from that. It's just, he better be in that system. Sean Durzi is excellent at zone defense, at blue line defense in this system because of the way the system is set up. Now, because of his size and his reach, he's that much better at it. Don't get me wrong. And I am a little surprised at how well the Roy one has worked, just because, and again, maybe as we see the Kings play better teams, we'll get more information, right? Because I mean, Roy isn't the kind of smooth skating, puck moving the puck. He did a great job of it last game, actually, ironically. Right after I wrote the article, I'm like, I don't know if he's great at that, but he did it last game. But I just don't know that that's his game. Like, he is a great defensive defenseman, and he's shown some offensive capabilities with his shot, but not necessarily in terms of transition and first passes and making outlets and zone exits. Like, that wasn't necessarily his thing. So I still am skeptical only from that front. I mean, I like both players. I like Roy as a player. I've been a big fan of his. I just wasn't sure how the fit would be. Obviously, so far, so good. But I still have questions. Again, like I said, on the road against tougher competition. Brandon, sorry.
Yeah, no, you guys are fine. So we have Cy coming in here. The trade would be a C+ bordering B-, depending on how Korpisalo plays versus good opposition. The X factor has to be Korpisalo, in my opinion. So he's there. Trapper coming in. I give Gavrikov an A based on my expectations of what he was bringing to the table. I was expecting more of an Edler. He's been way more than what I've expected, so he's getting an A there.
I'll say, and I'm sorry again, Random, you mentioned the expectations because I'm the one that catches heat daily about Gavrikov. He has exceeded my expectations. Like, he has played better than I expected. He has been a positive, like, no question about it. Do I still have questions? Yes. Do I want to sign him to an extension? No. Like, I'm very much in the wait and see. But as I've been saying since he's been here, so far so good.
Let's preface the advanced stats here before I get into my probably long diatribe. Gavrikov, Roy, expected goals, number one on the team versus any pair or line with over 70 minutes because they've only been here for a little bit. 76.6%, 6% goals expected. You're looking at 6.47 goals for per every 60 minutes and 1.97 goals against. So they're killing it, right? And then Roy Durzi is second for players, but they have 795 minutes together. So I was a C going into this just because I wanted to wait and see, ironically, about what was going on with everything. And I think you're looking at Portillo was a big, because it was the whole deadline, not just this specific trade, right? So I wanted to see Portillo and what he was going to be coming in. And if he signs, then my grade automatically bumps up because that exponentially makes our goalie room prospects better. But just on this trade in general, I still think it was a wait and see type thing. And what I think for me and why my grade is going to get bumped up is because of the versatility of Gavrikov being able to play on the second and third pair. They're going to be able to shake the lines around. I do like what Russell said earlier, to where generally in the last 5 minutes of a game, last 10 minutes of a game, the bench shortens and you can go to that stalwart Gavrikov-Roy pairing where you can have a different pair to start the game. You can go to that in your back pocket and really just ride the lead that you have available with two guys that are fantastic in their own zone. 1-3 run, he plays extremely well. I would like to see him with Walker, like you said. I would love to see him with Jordan Spence and seeing how that could work out, because I do think the Durzi-Roy pairing was a quality pair. And so the versatility for me really just bumps it up, because Edler has been non-versatile in every single aspect of his game this season. And I really just gets exposed on a nightly basis. So the fact that he is limiting the amount of exposure, the fact that he's fantastic in his own zone so far, and the versatility that it gives the bottom four, I think my grade is going to shoot up on that. I do think Korpisalo has been as advertised, or what I expected based on his advanced metrics. He's playing with a lot better team that plays in the opposing zone more often than his own. But he's also come up with some high quality saves on danger chances and hasn't shied away from the moment. So for me, definitely has bumped my grade up well out of the C. I think it's going to be B- or B flat so far. And what they've brought to this team and what this team could be in going forward. I think once Jersey gets healthy, you have a little bit more offense coming from the blue line. Your power play too is more solidified at that point if they're unwilling to play Jordan Spence. And then you can rotate that bottom four based on what you need. If you want to start the 2 first periods with Gavrikov on the third pair with Walker, and you have Roy Jersey, and then towards the end of the game, you kind of shore that up and go defensive only. I wouldn't be opposed to that. I think he's adding a lot there. His stick was way better than advertised. The octopus moniker that came from Columbus is very much true. He seems like he gets his stick on everything. So I think it's been well more than what I've thought that he would bring to the team, and the versatility that he can possibly bring to the bottom four once Jersey gets healthy. The penalty kill has looked a little bit better. He's constantly breaking stuff up on the blue line, which makes the 1-3-1 that much more formidable going forward against the teams like Colorado. Even though they were hemmed in, he still was stopping a lot of those things at the blue line. That team McKinnon is a top 3 player in the NHL, in my opinion. So it's going to be hard to stop that, which most likely we'll see Edmonton. So we're going to need Gavrikov to come up there. So my grade is going to be B- B in that area. If Portillo gets signed, which I assume he will, because I don't think the trade would have been made without that, it's going to definitely bump it up there. And then after that, it's pretty much just waiting to see how long or how far both these guys carry the Kings in the playoffs, and if there's any extensions and what those extensions are. Because obviously we don't want to overpay for guys just because of 1 month of play. But that's kind of where I'm sitting at there, to where pretty much was very harsh. It was the harshest out of all of us right as the trade. Maybe I was a little butthurt that we didn't get Chychrun. But I think that after now, and I'm seeing the versatility and what he can do and what he can be to the bottom four for the defensive, I still think I'm looking at a B- B until further notice.
Yeah, I think we've seen it. The Gavrikov with Roy, we've seen it unlock almost like this new level of Matt Roy's offensive play.
Yeah.
And we've seen it all season, but even just more lately, I've seen Matt Roy jump into the play a lot more in these last 6 games than I had in any of the previous games. Because, I mean, when you're paired with a player like Sean Durzi, who's constantly in the offensive zone and looking to make an offensive play, I mean, that kind of limits you a little bit. But, I mean, going back to last year, the best defensive pair in terms of advanced metrics for the Kings was Alex Edler and Matt Roy. And we talked about it with Alex Edler being this more of a stay-at-home defenseman. Matt Roy was able to open up a little bit and help out. And that's what we're seeing with Gavrikov and Roy. So I wonder if maybe we're looking at it a little bit more, kind of focusing too much on Gavrikov and not focusing enough on how this impacts Matt Roy and makes him take his next step in being, I mean, because he's setting career highs. He's almost close to 10 goals on the year. So, I mean, and this is a player who has a really good shot. So if he can kind of open up and find that space in the offensive zone, I think we might see a new level in terms of Matt Roy's play. And another thing too, with Brandon, like with your grade and my grade too, like that I didn't mention, but I'm glad you did, was this trade deadline. Our grades was about the trade deadline as a whole, not just focused on the actual Gavrikov and Korpisalo deal itself. So I guess this might segue into our next topic or a topic later on. But I was hoping with the cap space that they created in terms of getting rid of Jonathan Quick, I was hoping that they'd add a little bit more depth up front. But since they didn't, I mean, and that's kind of why my grade was so low, because I thought there was a missing piece in terms of bringing in a veteran presence on the fourth line. I mean, since they didn't, Rasmus Kupari is now all of a sudden a very important player for this team on the penalty kill, and he's become this fourth line center. I mean, the fourth line's is only going to play like so many minutes a night, and they're not going to find matchups. But I mean, when you're playing away, when you're in the not away from home, you're going to get those matchups because the team is definitely going to be playing players like Marchessault against Kupari, McDavid against Kupari, Burakovsky or whoever they play in Seattle against Kupari. So this is a player that's going to become very important for this team. And in terms of the fourth line, that's why I'm focusing a little bit more on it, because we know the top six. We almost know what the top nine is going to look like. But even the last few games, we've seen the fourth line be interchanged. And a lot of that's been because of bringing in Zach McEwen. I haven't really seen much out of him. I mean, it's just first couple games. But, I mean, just going back to the last game, I thought Grundstrom, Kaliev, and Kupari played really well together. So that'll be something to watch when we go closer to game 82 and to game 1 of the playoffs.
Well, that's a good foreshadow there, Russ, but we're going to get into it from our sponsors at DraftKings here before we get into the King Koopa topic. Ready for the underdogs, the upsets, and unbelievable action of DraftKings Sportsbook. The biggest tournament, March Madness in college basketball, is here. Right now, new customers can bet $5 on any college hoops and get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Plus, for a limited time, all customers can score a no-sweat bet during round 1 or 2 of the tournament. And 2, so you can make a no-sweat bet both rounds. Go into the app, opt in, and place a no-sweat bet this weekend. And if it doesn't hit, you get bonus bet back up to $10. You can pair which teams are going to be upsets, or is your bracket going to break? Download DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Sign up code THPN. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Win or lose, only at DraftKings Sportsbook with code THPN. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions may apply. So getting into our next topic, obviously bringing in McEwen to shore up another right-handed shot. Was he going to play center? Was he going to play wing? Was the writing on the wall for Rasmus Kupari? So far, no. Rasmus Kupari's played every game since the trade deadline, kind of locked into that 4C. Really elevated his game in the last 6 games. We saw a little bit of a grit and sandpaper, getting in fights, getting his helmet ripped off. I really seen a different elevation, which wasn't a part of his game that I ever thought would see happen based on what he was in his draft year, that fleet-footed, skillful player, moving up the ice, and he's still got all those skill sets, but he's adding stuff to this game. And I'll say it ad nauseum. In order to get more ice time, you have to add skill sets at the NHL level and develop on what you are good at, in junior. So Kupari getting the opportunity consistently at 4C. They've been shuffling the lines, Russell, as you mentioned. Kaliev stops in. Grundstrom coming back in. Russell, you've already admitted to it or talked about it a little bit. Let's throw it over to Joe and see what he wants to say about that topic and maybe piggyback on something that you alluded to earlier.
No, I think that.
Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
No, I think Kupari's played well. I was with Russ that I did think that kind of more of a veteran bottom 6 type of player, whether it was a third line center or a fourth line center, because again, I think you could have easily slid Lizotte down, and that really would have solidified the fourth line center too. Going back, talking about the deadline, but Kupari's played well. He's turned himself into a penalty killer and an effective one at that. I do think that he needs capable wingers next to him, because it didn't go well with McEwen. I mean, that fourth line was getting eaten alive, and Kupari was on that fourth line, so it wasn't like it wasn't just all Kupari, or excuse me, all McEwen. I think that when you have the right people around Kupari, I do think that it can help. I think the question is, when Fiala comes back, what do they do with the lineup? And I've said it before, I would love to see Fiala play with Velarde and Lizotte on the third line and move Iafallo down to that fourth line. Man, I just think that would really help solidify the fourth line. A player of Iafallo's ilk and his experience and the way he plays both ends of the ice, I think that could really, really help a kid like Kupari. And then you have the option of filtering through Kaliev or Grundstrom or Anderson Dolan as the other winger on that line. And I think that creates just a really solid amount of depth. So I think Kupari has played well in and of himself. There's not a whole lot there right now offensively, but he's doing a lot of the things defensively. His defensive metrics are very good. You mentioned it, Randon. He's really changed and kind of evolved his game. He's turned into a penalty killer. I think if you get the right wingers around him, it helps to elevate his game. So I think that's what needs to happen.
Yeah, I've actually been pleasantly surprised with Kupari's game, and it's funny because you think about Kupari, you almost think about this kind of like quiet player, but he's got a really fun personality, and he's kind of come across and kind of in social media with the team's social media lately, and you're noticing it on the ice. I mean, to step in front of and kind of step up to Matt Martin, that's no small pony. That's a big boy to kind of get up against. So that was really cool to see. But it's weird because I mean with Kupari, we've seen flashes, and I've almost kind of got this kind of Adrian Kempe. I see Adrian Kempe a little bit in him because, I mean, first round pick, he was a 20th overall pick. So he's got the pedigree and he's definitely got the skill set. We see the speed and we see the skill and in terms of shot too. So it's going to be the penalty kill is, you talked about it with Brandon. He's got to have to find a new kind of skill set to further cement his role in the team. And we're seeing it on the penalty kill. We're seeing him win a lot of draws. He's been really good on the faceoff dot. I think he's 53% right now, which is third on the team behind Kopitar and Danault. So he's doing good in that spot. And we want to, if he can just figure it out. I was thinking last night, watching the game against the Islanders, the Kupari breakout is going to be fun to watch because he's on the verge. He's there. And I wonder, like what you said, Joe, he's almost kind of forced to play with these line mates that are kind of just interchangeable. And he hasn't really found a really solid chemistry with anybody. But with Fiala out, and once he comes back, that'll be something to watch to see how the lines are configured at that point. Because the first line's playing so well with Byfield, Kopitar, and Kempe. I don't see them moving. I don't envision McClellan getting away from the nice line as much as he wanted to see Fiala with Danault and Arvidsson. I think Moore just plays so much better with Danault and Arvidsson, and those two other players play as much better with Moore as well. And with Fiala, we saw him kind of elevate his game with Lizotte and Velarde. So I think those three stick together. So yeah, if you can slide Iafallo down to play with a player like Kupari, who's a much more responsible player than probably any winger that he's played with this season, and then you stick an Arthur Kaliev on that side, a shooter, that could be a formidable line. It's just they have to figure out a way to play a full 200-foot game, which we've talked about, and what McClellan talked about last night with Arthur Kaliev, which is the reason why we've seen Kaliev come out of the lineup, which I wasn't really that outspoken with Artie coming out of the lineup. I kind of saw it a little bit. Like, I mean, there was moments 5-on-5 where it just seemed like he was really lost in terms of coverage and even in the neutral zone. So I got it. Like, I understood the message that McClellan was sending. So I'm glad to see him back in the lineup, especially with the woes that the power play was going through. But if Kaliev can figure out how to play that full 200-foot game, you add Iafallo, a player that always plays a full 200-foot game, to his other side, and a speedy center like Kupari, I think you have a really solid fourth line that can help out, and where we can get away from this notion where we were hoping to find a veteran presence. Because, I mean, if you have Iafallo on that fourth line, that's a really solid fourth line player to have. I mean, we talked about it for years. How many times we talk about how when Iafallo was on the first line, we're just like, he's a good bottom six player on a contending team. Yeah, and that's kind of where the Kings are right now. They're a contending team with Iafallo in the bottom six. So happy there.
The one thing I'll pour a little cold water on with the breakout, I'm hopeful, Russ, because I love the player and I love the talent. Like, when I look back at Blake Lizotte, you've seen him kind of like, whoa, he's turning into a bit of an offensive player, like, relatively speaking, right? But the reason I think we saw, or I shouldn't say we saw it coming, but the reason it's not a shock, at least to me, he was heavily involved in driving shot contributions even last year and even in playoffs. Game 4, he led the entire game, both teams, at shot contributions. Blake Lizotte, and he did it in 10 minutes of ice time. This is per Dmitry Filipovich. Like, more than Connor McDavid, more than Leon Draisaitl, more than Andrei Kopitar, Adrian Kempe, go on down the list. It was Blake Lizotte. So he's always had this knack of being somebody that contributes to the offense. Kupari hasn't done that this year. Now, I don't want to lean too much into it because his role has been kind of, it's been a bit evolving, and he's kind of settled into more of a defensive. So maybe he's just kind of hammering that down first. So maybe if he kind of trends this way, he shores up the D zone. We start to see him move a little bit more next year. I think the breakouts in 2 years potentially, if we start to see a little bit more offensive contributions, because right now, the only forwards he's ahead of in terms of shot contributions per 60 is Anderson Dolan, McEwen, and Alex Turcotte. So he really isn't doing much of anything at all in terms of driving offense. So that's okay though. Like I'm just saying I don't know that the breakout is imminent, at least in terms of like next season. But if we start to see these shot contributions start to come next year, we could be looking at Rasmus Kupari breakout in 24, 25.
Yeah, he's still only 23 years old, so
Absolutely.
he's still a very young player. I mean, this Adrian Kempe breakout kind of came out of nowhere. So
yeah, sorry. I was going. You had said Kempe, and it took a couple years, and I think that's. I think you look ahead, fast forward a couple years. I think that could be in line.
Yeah, and I think with Kupari is just he's just got to focus on playing a solid system role with this team. He doesn't need to do too much. Just focus on what you can do to help the team win. And he's not being looked at to be an offensive player. The Kings don't need that from Kupari. They just need him to play solid, full 200-foot ice minutes on the fourth line and help out on the penalty kill. And it's funny, we were talking to him in the locker room the other day, and he mentioned it's like the faceoffs was something he never really worked on in Europe. That was never a focus for them. And it's something that he's really tried to learn how to kind of get better at since coming over to the Kings. And we're starting to see him be better and better each year. And 53% in the dot isn't something to shake your head at. That's pretty good, especially for a player that plays a lot shorthanded. So
that's the kicker, Russ. I mean, the faceoffs come into play. I think they can be a little overrated at times, faceoffs, but when you're talking about special teams and you're talking about 3-on-3 overtime, it's crucial in those instances.
Yeah, I think you're looking at it, and Shankmaster comes in here and says, "Do you think there's an offensive side that could come down the road?" I really do. You think that's what his game was when he was getting drafted, was that skill set. I'm gonna throw some stats out here that I think maybe what looks at it. You look at individual point percentage for Rasmus Kupari. So how often is he actually a part of the goal or assist when he is on the ice? And it's at 66%, which leads him to be 7th on the team on overall for players who have played an absorbent amount of minutes. I thought it was kind of interesting that Samuel Fagemo, 100% in his 70 minutes. Every time his line scores, he's getting a point there. But what I'm looking at for Rasmus is he's only taken 32 shots this year. Yeah. If you look at other fourth-line players that have played similar minutes, right? So Rasmus Kupari has played 450 minutes. Other players like Grundstrom, 421, Jad, 426, Kaliyev, 416, and Quentin Byfield, 467, right? He's low. He's the lowest out of all those guys in shots taken. But he is shooting 9.38%, which is higher than Byfield, which is higher than Kaliyev, which is the same as Grundstrom. So you're looking at a guy, and I'm seeing it in his play, which was similar to what you're seeing or you saw with Kempe, as him being afraid to shoot when he has an opportunity to make a play and deferring to try to make the extra pass for a quote-unquote easier goal or whatever, and not taking the initiative to drive the play to the net, to shoot the shot when he's open. And so I really think that if Kupari is going to take that next step that we all think he is capable of, not only is he going to have to get more consistent wingers that can help him drive play as well, but he has to be more confident in his own abilities. He has to be able to show those flash plays more consistently, where he's driving that to the net on a consistent basis, where he's taking those shots on open ice, right? One of the best goals last year for him was on the power play when he got that puck right on the dot, moved in, toe drag, sniped it up in the corner. Like, the guy can shoot. So it's just something that has to be more confidence in his game, and we're not seeing it on a consistency basis. Where we're seeing the confidence this year, hey, I'm a penalty killer. I'm getting consistent minutes. I'm getting relied upon when the team needs a stop to come out there, and it's not just Blake Lizotte. It's not just Kopitar or no. I'm getting relied upon in big minutes and big opportunities late in the third period, where typically a fourth liner doesn't get that. So I think there's a lot of small things there that you can be positive about with Kupari's game, that you potentially could see him break out, quote unquote, and be a more consistent player up the lineup. Maybe not, a second line center or first line center, but a middle six player where maybe he can play a wing in a pinch up in the second line, plays third line center going forward. If he takes that offensive leap there, maybe some more power play time because he is a right shot. We have an absorbent amount of lefties on the power play, so maybe he gets that opportunity. I think there's a lot to like there, and I think he's taken the initiative to learn the defensive part of his game, which, like you said, Russ, was not taught to him. Defensive part, taking faceoffs out of the dot was really not taught because when you're in junior and you're the best player in your team, you're relied upon to score. You're not relied upon to do anything else. And now he's learning to play other parts of his game. There's a lot to I like with him. And back in December, when I said he was my number one prospect, to where I really am rooting for him to succeed. I'm rooting for him to have a consistent role on this team, and I think he can do it.
Yeah, I think next year's a big year to see, is he going to be a centerman or is he going to be a winger? I don't think and listen, there's nothing wrong if he carves out a role as a defensive centerman. There's nothing wrong with that, because I think he can be, if he's effective at that and kill penalties, that's great. But you've mentioned his skill. There's so much skill in his tool set that it'd be nice to see him unlock that a bit. He just screams middle six kind of winger to me. But we'll see. I mean, if he can, like I said, if he can start to drive play a little bit more as a center on the offensive side of things next year, because now that he's got this kind of defensive, he's settled into being a trusted and responsible defensive center. Hopefully he's got the confidence to where next year, if he's playing fourth line minutes, he should be taking over those fourth line shifts, right? He should be able to control play on that fourth line against other teams' fourth lines. And that's what we'd be looking for next year.
Yeah, a lot of my kind of hopes and kind of dreams for Kupari was to just get him on the wing and just see how he's able to utilize a lot of that speed on the outside, because that's where he thrives. And I almost kind of wish that he had been given the opportunity that Quentin Byfield's been given. But I mean, I totally understand Byfield has a way higher ceiling, so that it makes all the sense in the world. But yeah, with the way this team, it's weird, because you look at this team, we're almost looking at the same lineup probably for next year too. You could have Quentin Byfield just be the first line winger next year. I mean, just the way that they're signed, with how everybody's kind of looking at the salary cap situations, all the forwards are pretty much coming back. Gabe Velarde's really the only contract that needs to be signed. I believe Kupari's an RFA, but I'm sure he'll get qualified and it'll be no problem there. But yeah, so you're looking at almost the same lineup that might come into play next year. So if they don't want to move Byfield back to that center position, they're comfortable with Kupari there. Yeah, this is going to be a position that he's going to have to solidify. And if he can take over, learn the defensive side, like what Shankmaster said, they're teaching him this defensive side first. If he can learn that side, the offensive zone time will come. That skill set will be shown. If you're able to learn defense first, like what we've seen with players like Kopitar, Phil Deneau, these players that are really solid their defensive end, if they can use those instincts in his own zone, and then use his speed once he finally gets the puck to counterattack and get plays off the rush, we could see that Kupari breakout coming sooner rather than later. So, I mean, there's a lot of prospects coming too. I mean, you talk about, like, you look at Samuel Fagima, who's playing really well. You have a lot of other prospects that are coming up. I mean, Francesco Pinelli's going to be in the AHL probably next year. I mean, Alex Laferriere might be in the AHL next year. So you have a lot of good wingers that are coming up in the wings, coming up in the prospect system. So, yeah, it's a good time for the Kings. They're playing really well, and you think about it, like, their top two prospects, one's 20 years old, he hasn't even got to 100 games played in the NHL yet, and the other one's just lighting up the OHL just night in and night out as a defenseman. It's insane, the trajectory. I mean, if you're buying future tickets for the Kings Stanley Cup hopes in 2024, 25, 26, just buy now. Buy Kings stock now, because it's low. And it's going to keep building. And we're talking about them even being contenders this year. So this is a team that could be watching it. If Rob Blake plays his cards right and he just keeps these prospects and keeps them percolating in the right time frame, this could be a team that contends for a long time, not just kind of more of a flash in the pan that we saw for that 3-year run they had from 2012 to 2014.
And assuming he gets Pierre-Luc Dubois as his number one center, because they're going to need one of those in a couple of years.
Or Austin Matthews, which everybody's looking at him too. So
let's get to across the Pacific. Now, obviously, the standings are narrowing down coming in. We talked about it, how Edmonton is one of the top teams after the break, just like the Kings. They've surged into the number 3 spot. You still got Seattle there. You could win the Pacific and have to play Colorado in the first round. The Pacific and the Western Conference in general is kind of scooping up to be interesting where these first round matchups are coming from. And I think it's interesting that we think the West is wide open compared to the Eastern Conference, but there's some interesting matchups that could possibly happen in the first round where the surging Oilers are a possibility. You look at, we haven't played well against Seattle this year, and Colorado, if they get healthy and we win the division, you could be looking at playing them. So there's a lot of opportunities here. Let's look at the standings before I get into what we think about the Pacific. Obviously, Vegas tied with games played, 3 points ahead of the Kings right now with 90 and 87. Edmonton, same, 68 games played, 82 points. They're 5 points behind. Seattle and Winnipeg are in the wild card at 81 and 79. And the 3 teams in the Central are Dallas, Minnesota, and Colorado. So what are we seeing here out of the Western Conference and maybe the Pacific as far as the potential matchups? What are you seeing from other teams, and which teams have really caught your eye of getting better? And maybe you're worried about different teams than you were worried about Calgary before there, Joe.
Still worried about the Flames.
Flames never die.
Listen, I think it's funny because I've been thinking about this last few days. Like all the teams have their different elements, but none of them are complete teams. Kind of, not dissimilar to the Kings. They're all very, very similar. Edmonton scares me because, listen, for obvious reasons, they have the elite high-end talent. I think the move to get Bukestad for the third line center, the move to get Matthias Ekholm to shore up the blue line, those are not insignificant moves. So, I think Stuart Skinner is capable. I don't think I would trust him, but my opinion on goalies. Would I be surprised if Stuart Skinner has a good playoff? Not in the slightest.
He's better than Mike Smith. We'll start there.
I think so. I got pushback on that when I said that the other day, but I think he is. So, Edmonton scares me. I would love to avoid Connor McDavid in the first round because I'd be curious to see what the Kings defense core looks like, because you can't play Alex Edler every game in a 7-game series. That's not going to go well against that team. So how does the Kings, we talked about it earlier with the defense pairings, how do they move those around? Vegas, on the other hand, probably has the best defensive core, of a team that's going to make the playoffs, because I don't know what Calgary's getting in. So Vegas, their D-core looks good. You got Jack Eichel. Obviously, Jonathan Quick is all of a sudden playing well. So that team, I'm not as scared of them without Mark Stone. I don't know if he's going to come back for playoffs, but that's a big loss. So I don't know that their depth up front. I think the Kings are much better depth-wise up front than Vegas. I want no part of Colorado. Their D moved the puck well, and I know the Kings won that game, but it was one of those things where Colorado was in the zone. The Kings would come down and score. Colorado's back in the zone. Kings would come down and score. It wasn't a game where the Kings controlled the game or dominated the game in any sense, in my opinion, anyway. So, I would say Edmonton scares me. Colorado would scare me. I say, if I had a quote unquote preference, Seattle, but that's probably not giving them the credit that they're due. That's a good team. They're deep like the Kings are. I don't think, ironically, they don't have maybe the high end talent, but they're deep. They got a really good D-core. I don't trust their goaltending at all either. So I think if there's one team that I would prefer to play, it's probably Seattle, just because they don't have. I don't think they have the elite talent that can exploit a couple of the deficiencies on the Kings blue line like some of the other teams can. I mean, I know James McCann's having a great season. They got some talented forwards. They're deep up there, but it's not like McDavid and Eichel and McKinnon and Draisaitl and all those guys. So I think that's kind of where I'm at. But I also think that's a little bit of a lazy answer because I think everybody would probably say Seattle, and I don't think that's giving them the credit that they probably deserve.
Yeah, just kind of a side note here. Jordan Bennington and Marc-Andre Fleury almost just got in a fight right now. They actually had to separate them on the ice. That was actually pretty cool. If you
I was watching
look at the highlight. Yeah, that's crazy. But yeah, for me, I think the Kings have to win the division. And a lot of it goes back to what you just said, Joe. I'm scared of the Oilers.
Should be.
Yeah, Connor McDavid is just – we saw what happened in the playoffs last year. I mean, even Evander Kane. I mean, Evander Kane just dominated the Kings up in front of the net. And that's kind of probably the reason why they got a player like Gavrikov to help out down low because, I mean, there was really nothing that the Kings could do. I mean, they just couldn't match the physicality and they couldn't match the speed that McDavid had. And you add a defenseman like Ekholm, you add a big body like Bukestad, that's huge. And goaltending will be the biggest question mark, and it's kind of the biggest question mark for a lot of the teams in the divisions. And why I said that you could look at the Kings as having the best goaltending in the Pacific Division, and probably that's more solidified now. I mean, you just look at the stats since the deadline, small sample size, but it's looking good so far. So for me, I think the Kings, they have to try to win the division because I don't see the Oilers winning the division. I see them being one of the 2 or 3 seeds in the Pacific. And if the Kings can't catch the Golden Knights, then they're going to be more than likely facing the Oilers. So if I had to pick between facing a team like Seattle or Winnipeg against Edmonton, I'm going to choose Seattle and Winnipeg every day. Like, give me that matchup 9 times out of 10. So that's why it's weird because the Kings are solidified in the playoffs. It'd be a disaster if they missed it at this point, and I don't see that happening. So, but we're still in this push. We're still in a push for the division, and it has nothing to do with the sentimental value of winning the second division title and in franchise history or whatever. And it just has to do with everything with who they're going to play in the first round, and that's just because of how the playoff seeding is worked right now in the NHL. So if they play the Oilers, I mean, I don't think that – I'm not saying that the Kings will lose against the Oilers. I think they'll put up a good – I think it'll be a great series, and I think they have a good chance to beat them. But if I can if I can have the Oilers play against the Golden Knights in the first round and have the Kings face the Jets, let the Golden Knights and Oilers have at it and then figure it out in their next few rounds after that. Like, let's start there. And then we can face the Oilers in round 2 or round 3 or whatever. So for me, if they can win the division, that's will be huge.
Probably as important as anything is home ice, whether they finish second in the division or first in the division.
Yeah, that's it.
Having that home ice is huge. Sorry, Brandon.
Oh, you're fine. You're exactly saying what I was going to say. Kings 21-9-3 at home. The only team in the Pacific to have only single-digit losses at home. So, I mean, they play well at home ice, which wasn't the case last year. They were a little bit up and down. So they play well on home ice and getting that, I mean, any team that potentially makes the wild card, Seattle, Winnipeg, Nashville, Calgary, like, I'm not afraid of, right? Like, Hellebuck can get on a tear. He's one of the better goalies in the league, but I'm not afraid of the rest of the team to where I still think you're looking at something like the Nashville game where UC Soros was dominant or Sorokin was dominant, and we still ended up scoring multiple goals because of the fact that the rest of the team was just punishing their 4 lines. So, I mean, I think the quest is to win the division as it always is. You want to win as many games as possible, but I think it's more important because of the person that or the team that you're playing. I think McDavid is on pace to have the first 130-point season since like 1995 or something like that, something crazy stat, and he only needs 1 point to do it at this point. So, like, he's going to get that. Not that I don't think we can't beat Edmonton, like I said, but I want to see the Kings get their feet wet in the playoffs, get a series, get some confidence, because when this team is playing with confidence and you get a goalie, like I said, we talked about it earlier, goalie who are both inexperienced in the playoffs, we get them a playoff series win and move forward, and the confidence goes forth with this team. We can beat anybody at that point. I just think that you need to have that base footing, and you see about it with I forget who said it. It was on a national broadcast, but they said like the Kings need to get their feet wet. They need to get their, get beat, and they need to win a playoff series and then get beat and like kind of build that up like the Kings, like most playoff teams do. They don't usually jump in their first opportunity and go all the way to the Stanley Cup. It really doesn't happen that way. Usually you have to take your lumps. And so lumps come with success as well. They took the lumps last year, got beaten game 7. They probably should have won game 6 and went on to the next round. They didn't do that. And now you can have a chance to get a playoff series win under your belt. If you win the division, that odds goes up higher that you build that confidence in the first series. And then the sky's the limit at that point. I mean, the confidence is all-time high. You got a team that can play with anybody. We beat all those teams this year. Best team since January 1st. So I just think that it's important to get that first series win. Obviously, you have to get it in order to win the Stanley Cup, but just not only for this year's Kings, but for that core that we talked about going forward, that's going to be important for them too.
Yeah, and I think the more I think about it, like the perfect matchup is Seattle because you avoid McDavid, you avoid all that, but you also avoid Connor Hellebuck in Winnipeg. Like, because that would be the best goalie in the playoffs from the right in the Western Conference is, would be Connor Hellebuck. So if you can avoid that too in the first round, that'd be great. But anyways, like it's I think the Kings need home ice. I think it's going to be interesting to see. We talked about earlier how teams decide to match up against them, to see what the Kings decide to do with their pairings. We're going to be paying a lot of attention to that Northwestern road trip coming up. I think it's at the end of the month. To see, that'll be a little bit of a test, right? To see how McClellan lines up, what he does with his D pairs, who plays where. And then you see how the Flames, do they put Lindholm, Huberdeau next or out against? Who do they decide to put their top guns up against? And who does McDavid play against? Who does Jared McCann play against from Seattle? Like how do these teams decide to attack the Kings, and what D pair are they going to try to exploit? And then further, how does that D pair, assuming it's going to be the Gavrikov right pair, how do they handle it? And that's going to tell us a lot about where this Kings team is as they head into playoffs.
So you're not scared of Martin Jones with Seattle?
Well, that's the biggest thing. So the biggest thing with Seattle is good Lord. I mean, listen, if you play Seattle, and I like that team, right? I was the Seattle guy coming into the season. I didn't think they'd be quite this good, but I was a fan of their team. If you can't beat Martin Jones and Phil Grubauer, I got nothing for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's huge because it's weird because you win the division. I mean, we're not even saying like they're possibly winning the conference. They're looking at home ice all the way to the Stanley Cup final, which is you look at the record and you look at the matchups that McClellan wants. That's huge for the Kings. I mean, that you can't overstate that enough. I mean, this is a team that thrives on matching up well against their opponent, and especially since we're talking about possibly having Alex Edler in the lineup. We've talked about the fourth line. I mean, if you can have that last change throughout the first 3 rounds of the playoffs and then figure it out in the Stanley Cup final, I mean, you can ride that wave all the way to the final.
Best home record in the Western Conference, 4th best in the NHL. So the Kings are definitely good on home ice, good at exploiting those matchups, as you said, Russ. It's going to be something that's going to be very much crucial down the stretch. Got to get those points. Got to get those points and win the matchups. Well, boys, we are at 90 minutes. I think we did a great job explaining this last week. It's been a fun Kings hockey, man. Kings hockey's fun now. It's awesome. We're getting here ready for the playoffs. Seeing these good games. I'm excited to see 2 games, first games at Crypto for me, and probably I don't know, like 5 or 6 years or so. But 6 years, my 30th birthday. I went for my birthday party out there in LA. So 6 years, going to be at the Crypt, going to see the new statue, going to see some good teams, hopefully see the wizard that is Fiala on the ice for the first time live and get a couple Kings W's, man. Hopefully we get a 4-point trip out there in LA for myself. Appreciate everybody in the chat for coming in. You guys are always appreciated here at Hockey Royalty. Find all of our articles at hockeyroyalty.com. Find us on Twitter at hockey_royalty, at NHL Russell, at Rando Commando 24, at JW Paterino for all that hate mail. Send it to Joe, please. I don't want any part of it. Thank you guys as always. We're probably going to do a couple more live streams. Those are always fun for the games on the road trip. So keep an eye out for that. And as always, on this podcast, go Kings go.